The Attorney General himself, Ken Paxton, tweeted saying, quote, "What we just witnessed is illegal."
Conventional wisdom was we would never get any Republicans to support gun legislation, period.
Anti-gunners put in there to keep the guns out of the hands of lawful citizens in New York State.
Distribution of 10 to 40 million of these braces and the implementation of your rule. Did Congress pass a law?
I'm just inspired by the next generation. I think it's a time for a big change.
Seeking SC emergency review. The ATF's frames and receivers rule has been a subject of intense debate and legal challenges, and the agency is now escalating the matter by seeking an emergency review in the Supreme Court. This decision comes after a significant setback for the ATF in the Texas District Court, where Judge Reed O'Connor ruled in favor of the plaintiffs, finding the ATF's rule invalid and exceeding the scope of its authority. The frames and receivers rule is a crucial aspect of firearm regulation as it pertains to defining what constitutes a firearm. The ATF's rule in question involves how certain parts of firearms, specifically frames and receivers, are classified. These components are essential for the functioning of a firearm and play a critical role in determining its legal status. Judge O'Connor's ruling struck down the ATF's frames and receivers rule entirely and applied the decision nationwide, which dealt a substantial blow to the ATF's efforts to regulate these components more strictly. This ruling was celebrated by Second Amendment advocates who have long argued against what they perceive as ATF overreach and attempts to limit gun rights. The ATF's decision to seek an emergency review in the Supreme Court underscores the significance of this case and its potential implications for gun regulations and Second Amendment rights across the country. The agency's willingness to take the matter to the highest court indicates that they are prepared to defend their interpretation of the law and assert their authority in regulating firearms. If the Supreme Court agrees to review the case on an emergency basis, it will have to grapple with complex legal questions surrounding the ATF's authority to regulate firearms components and the extent to which such regulations can impact Second Amendment rights.
Blatantly denying the power grab being carried out by the executive branch yet again.
The uptick in violence has just been astronomical. The gun violence.
As a kid, I came out of a different movement, the civil rights movement.
Who showed up here said one thing that felt good about doing this kind of event was that they felt empowered.
Pretty clear about the extent to which this is an abuse of the Administrative Procedures Act.
Is it a difficult question to understand?
I'm sure it's enormously high.
It's 36 per 100,000 people.
I just felt that I needed to be able to protect myself.
The court's decision could set a precedent and establish a clear framework for future challenges to firearm regulations, shaping the landscape of gun rights in the United States. Given the divisive nature of gun control issues and the importance of the Second Amendment to many Americans, the Supreme Court's ruling in this case could spark considerable public and political debates. The outcome will be closely watched by both gun rights advocates and proponents of stricter firearm regulations, as it could significantly impact the balance between individual gun rights and government authority to regulate firearms. Vanderstock versus Garland is a highly consequential legal case that centers on the ATF's authority to regulate frames and receivers, which are fundamental components of firearms. The lawsuit, named after the lead plaintiff, has garnered widespread attention from both gun rights advocates and gun control proponents due to its potential impact on Second Amendment rights and firearm regulations. In his ruling, Judge Reed O'Connor, a Texas federal district court judge, delivered a decisive blow to the ATF's frames and receivers rule. He found the rule to be unconstitutional and ruled that it exceeded the ATF's statutory authority. As a result, Judge O'Connor vacated the rule entirely, making it null and void across the entire United States. This nationwide scope of the ruling amplified its significance and repercussions, affecting firearm regulations in all states. The ruling was met with jubilation by Second Amendment advocates who have long been critical of what they perceive as the ATF's overreach in regulating firearms. They see the ATF's frames and receivers rule as an example of regulatory excess, arguing that it infringes on law-abiding citizens' rights to keep and bear arms. For them, Judge O'Connor's decision was a major victory, representing a clear and forceful affirmation of individual gun rights.
And having to tell her that other 9-year-olds were just killed in a shooting is horrific.
Get on the ground now!
I'm a federal agent.
917-110-3.
I'm a federal agents.
Get on the ground! Field background checks could stop a lot of illegal guns going in different places in the country.
Shall not be infringed, and the word infringe means by banning parts on firearms actually is against the Constitution.
Affect us here, and it was such a breath of fresh air for the Second Amendment people.
It takes extraordinary courage for them to stand up here and retell the story.
Anti-gunners put in there to keep the guns out of the hands of lawful citizens in New York State.
Conversely, advocates of stricter firearm regulations and gun control measures express concern over the ruling's implications. They view the ATF's regulation of frames and receivers as a necessary measure to ensure public safety and prevent firearms from falling into the wrong hands. In their view, invalidating the rule could create loopholes and potentially compromise efforts to regulate firearms more effectively. Given the highly polarized nature of the gun control debate in the United States, the Vanderstock v. Garland ruling has added fuel to an already fiery controversy. The case touches on the core principles of the Second Amendment and the government's authority to regulate firearms, making it a deeply divisive issue with far-reaching consequences. The ATF's decision to seek an emergency review in the Supreme Court following their loss in the Texas District Court underscores the significance of this case. If the Supreme Court decides to take up the matter, it will have the opportunity to provide clarity on the ATF's regulatory authority and offer guidance on the limits of gun control measures. Denial by the Fifth Circuit. Following the unfavorable ruling in the Texas District Court, the ATF swiftly appealed the decision to the Fifth Circuit, seeking a stay to maintain their frames and receivers rule while the case was being appealed. A stay would have allowed the ATF to continue enforcing their regulation on frames and receivers, preserving the status quo during the appeals process. However, the Fifth Circuit delivered a blow to the ATF's efforts by denying their request for a stay. The denial meant that the district court's ruling, which declared the frames and receivers rule as unconstitutional and vacated it nationwide, took immediate effect. This was a significant setback for the ATF as it effectively halted their ability to enforce the rule while the appeal was ongoing. The denial by the Fifth Circuit heightened the urgency of the case, prompting the ATF to take further action by filing an emergency application with the Supreme Court.
We are not finished. We are not finished. We are not finished.
The submitted firearm brace, when attached to a firearm, does not convert that weapon to be fired from the shoulder and would not alter the classification.
Not one more! Not one more! Not one more!
Distribution of 10 to 40 million of these braces and the implementation of your rule. Did Congress pass a law?
The denial also signaled that the appellate court was not inclined to grant the ATF's request for a stay, indicating potential skepticism about the agency's arguments in support of their regulation. The Fifth Circuit's decision added another layer of complexity to the legal battle over the frames and receivers rule, and it heightened the suspense surrounding the potential outcomes of the case. With the Fifth Circuit's ruling, the attention now turned to the Supreme Court, where the ATF sought emergency intervention to overturn the lower court's decision and defend the constitutionality of their regulation. The denial of the stay request further fueled the debate over the proper scope of the ATF's authority in regulating firearm components and intensified the scrutiny surrounding Second Amendment rights and gun regulations. ATF's change in legal tactics. The ATF's change in legal tactics is conspicuous as it marks a departure from their traditional stance in Second Amendment cases. Historically, the ATF and other government agencies have been reluctant to advocate for immediate Supreme Court intervention, often arguing that cases should follow the usual path through lower courts before reaching the highest court of the land. They have emphasized the importance of allowing the appellate process to unfold fully, advocating for the lower courts to decide on the matters in the first instance. However, in the Vanderstock v. Garland case, the ATF is demonstrating a sense of urgency and a desire for swift resolution. By seeking emergency Supreme Court intervention, they are now actively pressing for the highest court's immediate involvement. This shift in approach suggests that the ATF perceives this case as having extraordinary significance and requiring prompt resolution.
To run enhanced background checks on young people under 21 trying to buy a firearm.
This government can protect its own people, except for 36 out of every 100,000 for murders.
Types of disputes that would be settled by people yelling at each other, maybe engaging in a fist fight, are being settled with guns.
I'm just inspired by the next generation. I think it's a time for a big change.
They may be concerned that allowing the case to proceed through the usual appellate process could result in prolonged uncertainty and conflicting decisions across different circuits, creating legal confusion and potentially affecting their enforcement efforts. Stay or expedited certiorari. In their emergency application to the Supreme Court, the ATF is seeking urgent action to address the implications of the Texas District Court's ruling that struck down their frames and receivers rule. The application presents two distinct requests for the court's consideration: a stay of the lower court's decision or an expedited certiorari before judgment in the upcoming fall term. The first request, a stay of the lower court's decision, is a more conservative approach. The ATF argues that granting a stay would prevent further harm while allowing other challenges to the rule to proceed through the litigation process. This request aligns with the ATF's historical position of preferring the appellate process to run its course before seeking Supreme Court review.
Since you rewrote the rules of asylum based on the perceived degree of violence in these countries,
selling more guns in the last 3 weeks than we did in the last 8 months.
But for me, and for most of you, here's what it really is. It's an important first step.
When somebody bump fires, think of this as a bump fire stock and able to move.
To be clear, this wasn't based on violence. This is based on threats, specifically to individuals, on gangs.
The ATF's goal with this request is to maintain the status quo and keep their frames and receivers rule in effect while the case continues to be litigated in the courts. The second request, a certiorari before judgment, is a more assertive and ambitious move by the ATF. It reflects their sense of urgency in resolving the case swiftly and obtaining a definitive ruling from the Supreme Court. By bypassing the intermediate appellate court, the Fifth Circuit in this case, and seeking immediate review by the highest court, the ATF aims to obtain a timely resolution and clarity on the constitutionality of their frames and receivers rule. The alternative request demonstrates the ATF's recognition of the importance and urgency of the matter. They contend that the gravity of the public safety issues involved justifies the court's immediate attention to the case. And why wouldn't they? They change their tactics when it suits them. The ATF's strategy appears to be driven by fears that delays in the appellate process could result in differing rulings from various circuit courts, leading to inconsistent application of the law on a national scale. And that's all for this video, folks. We'll see you next time.